Okay, it's 4 o'clock. Can you hear me? It seems so. I hear myself anyhow. You are very welcome to this DG RegioPolicy session that deals with the cohesion policy's contribution for solving legal obstacles in cross-border regions. I will be chairing this session, and we have 4 very qualified contributors that each of them have an, say, overarching headline and then a more detailed headline for their talks. First of all, we have Sławomir Tokarski, Director of DG Regio. It's an honor having you here with us today, the European Commission. Then we have Roberta Capello, my president in Europe, that is, president for the European Regional Science Association, also professor at the Politecnico di Milano in Italy. Then we have Ricardo Ferreira, border focal point coordinator at DG Regio, the European Commission, that is dealing with what is being done. And finally, we also have the important question of what else should be done to solve these border regional problems. Philippe Wary, French ambassador for Intergovernmental Commission's Cooperation and Border Issues. And I think we should greet them with a hand to start with. So, it's no use for me standing here talking when we have people who know more about these issues than I do. So I start with giving the floor to Sławomir Tokarski, please.
Right. Thank you very much for this introduction, and maybe let me share with you a couple of reflections on cohesion policy in general, a little bit about how do I see the future of the policy and Interreg in particular, and then ending up telling a couple of words about why this focus and this interest in border obstacles. So maybe first a general context, and this context is, you may call it interesting, you may call it challenging. This is the context where we are heading towards a new financial perspective. You know that the Commission has this particular timeline when we are talking about the next financing period well ahead before this period starts. So we are already thinking about the period after 2028. And we are looking at what is happening right now. This is certainly a very difficult budget, and perhaps, as many people say, the most difficult budget in the history of European Union. And I think the reasons are obvious to everybody. We have a war at our borders, both at our eastern borders, but also at our southern borders. We have massive migration. I think in 2022, we gave 3.5 million permits of residence, the greatest number in the history of the Union. We have the climate change and green transition with which we need to deal successfully if we don't want to alienate our societies. And the transition which, if not addressed properly, might become a source of social discontent, and also one of the forces acting against cohesion rather than in favor of the cohesion. So finally, there is also the accession, the process of the enlargement, which is in itself a positive news, but it also requires resources, both human resources and financial resources. So this is against this background that we'll be looking at the future of cohesion policy and the future of Interreg. And as you may see, it's quite challenging because precisely of the need for new resources, meaning money and people, to deal with new challenges. And as it seems that nobody is willing to pay more to European budget, that means that we'll have to deal with all of this with what we have right now. And that means that we have to curve out, both in terms of resources and money, those elements that will be needed to talk about defense, to talk about migration, to implement effectively the process of the enlargement of the European Union. So that means that those policies which are in the center of the European right now will be under quite a lot of pressure. And this is what is happening right now when we are discussing the future of the cohesion policy and the future of Interreg. I think maybe one more challenge that we all see is also the sort of slow erosion of democratic consensus in our societies, the increasing polarization, the sort of disappearance of the idea of common good, and this is also something that we need to keep in our minds when talking about the future of the policy and the future of European Union. And when we look right now at the Interreg and the program that we are responsible for, I think it stands out against this context as something very positive. And it is so for a number of reasons. It is very positive because it is talking precisely about looking for empathy, looking for trust, looking for solidarity, about giving the people the chance to cooperate, to work together, which in itself is something very positive. So Interreg in a way is encapsulating all the European values that we are trying to promote. I think I'm often telling to my colleagues in DG Regio that they have very rewarding work because this is sort of therapy in itself. Working with people which like each other is rather unusual in these times, and they have this privilege on a daily basis. And I also would like to quote here maybe two persons. One is the president who said, I think actually looking at the project at the border of Hungary and Croatia, no? That she never said, she never saw the money so well spent, so we are using right now in our promotion campaign. And the other is maybe more pragmatic conclusion that comes from the evaluation process of Interreg policies, where 95% of respondents said that without Interreg, there will be no cross-border cooperation. So this is something, there is something special and there is something important about Interreg. And I think one of the reasons why it is so, if you want, liked or so much appreciated, is also its capacity to adapt to very different contexts. We are not only having Interreg on the internal borders of the European Union, we have Interreg on the external borders. We had the program where Israel and Palestinian Autonomy were working together. And to my big surprise, when I was expecting that in this financial period, after what happened in Gaza, Israel and Palestine will not sign, for the moment the signs are quite encouraging. So nobody said no so far. And it's really interesting that there is some sort of willingness to continue the Interreg cooperation, notwithstanding basically the war that is in Gaza. So what is so special about Interreg? I think there are three things which make it so unique. Well, first of all, it is a small program which is tailored to the places in which it is operating. I mean, normally cohesion policy works at much larger scale with bigger projects. And here we are talking about smaller areas, it's below NUTS 2, where projects are really well suited to the specificity of both the territories, and both the territories are specific. They are very different, they have very different situation, and the advantage of Interreg is that it's capable of taking those different characteristics into consideration. Secondly, it is about cooperation. I mean, cooperation per se has an economic value because we are talking about pooling different assets together, about facing challenges together, but also has a strong emotional value for the people who participate in it. And I think it's a pity that when we do the audits of the project, we don't look at what happened to the people who were participating in them, because very often we see that their attitudes towards people on the other side of the border are diametrically opposed compared with what happened before. So there is this extra value, often emotional value, and emotions exist, as we know, and also economics recognize it right now. And these emotions are something that is important, and it often makes small Interreg project stand well above the big infrastructure project realized the same place. And finally, we see that they are often based on the community approach. And community approach is something that is gaining perhaps on importance right now. We see it in many cooperative movements, we see it in renewable energy communities, but I think the value here is that the address of the project or the beneficiary of the project is the whole community. And again, this stands from the point of view of economics, because this is about a resilient community, this is about distributed networks, what have you, but at the same time it certainly addresses those needs that people have regarding the neighborhood, feeling of being included, or something which French sometimes call réappropriation, reappropriation of the territory, that people have the feeling that they gain a degree of control over what's happening in their place, and in this way also over what's happening to their lives. So the question here is, how we can preserve Interreg for the future or reinforce it, while at the same time we can quite validly argue that Interreg is more important and more needed than ever. And the discussion has just started. We have launched a couple of months ago the first consultations, and what is special about this consultation is that we ask not only programs about what they think, that is people working on a daily basis with Interreg, but we also ask programs to ask citizens about what they want. Because we believe that this type of democratic legitimacy, this type of bottom-up approach is very important for Interreg. It's a force of Interreg. And somehow it also plays well with this drive for more economic democracy, more bottom-up approaches, more citizens-driven initiatives. And I think this gives visibility, and this gives also people a sense of being included and involved in the policy making. So these consultations started right now. They will be lasting until the event that we planned for March next year in a symbolic place, because it's going to be Gorizia, Nova Gorica, the twin town, which in a way is a little bit encapsulating what for us would be a holy grail of the Interreg, that is sort of cross-border community that works together and acts together in a type of functional area which is Twin City. Now, when we are talking about Interreg and cross-border cooperation, for quite a long time we were thinking that Interreg programs are sufficient to drive this cooperation. But I think what we see increasingly is that there are limits to which Interreg can move, and then it encounters some type of obstacles that prevents more profound and more intense cooperation from happening. And maybe strangely enough, these obstacles are more visible in the borders that are more advanced and have bigger history of integration. I just give you maybe one example which comes from the border that has very long history, which is Belgian-Dutch border, the town called Barle, right? Where it is a sort of strange situation where the border intersects the city in different places. You have exclaves, enclaves, and counter-enclaves. Meaning that basically every step you are in a different country, once in Belgium and once the Netherlands. And yet, notwithstanding that this border has a long history, that there is a Benelux, there are institutions and so on, I think for the last 40 years, the waste collection was taking place separately, meaning that on the same street we had once Belgian lorries collecting waste from Belgian houses, and then Dutch lorries collecting waste from Dutch houses, which was clearly not optimum solution. And only very recently this problem was solved. So that means basically that when the integration becomes more advanced, when the cooperation becomes more sophisticated, then there are more obstacles because you are looking for something more, because there is a snowball effect of cooperation. So this made us think what to do with this type of obstacles, which normally are due to different legal and administrative systems on both sides of the border. They can be from something trivial to something very, very complex, which basically prevents people from staying there. Or forces them to migrate as they do not have access to work or education or another type of public service. And this is how the history of our legal tool to solve cross-border obstacles basically started. We looked at so-called B solutions. So we are trying to spot a number of obstacles that prevent people from working on both sides of the border. We found that there is a wide range of them, and that almost more than 1/3 of them can be only solved by the intervention of the central government. So we thought it would make sense to do something in order to to address the obstacles which seem maybe sometimes banal from the point of view of the capital, but for the people living there in border areas, they are quite important. There is right now the report prepared by Italian Prime Minister Enrico Letta, and he is talking about another European right, which is the right to stay where I want to stay, but I can't because something is lacking. And this right to stay quite often can be associated with border obstacles. So if I can send my kid to the school on the other side of the border because my part of the border is demographic decline, there's not enough kids and so on. If I can go to the hospital or if I can go to the work, that prevents me from migrating and I can stay in this region and prevents demographic decline and so on. So this is maybe a short account of what's happening right now. So cohesion policy, the future to be seen, but certainly it will find itself under a lot of pressure. Interreg is something very unique and very special. I will just give you one more example where we suspended or we discontinued cooperation with Russia and Belarus. From both countries we got very long letters arguing that we were wrong. And that means that even dictators were caring for this type of collaboration. And this also shows how flexible it could have been in the past. But of course, today is impossible. And then finally, indeed, this tool, which we think also takes us into the future of the policy, because we might be looking really not only at the funding mechanism, but also the mechanism that would be really removing obstacles, preventing interactions from taking place on our borders. This is something deeply symbolic, but also deeply pragmatic, because I think one of the biggest achievements of the Union is this fact that now when we look at the border, it is something that it encourages us to cross it, to look out, to reach out, rather than prevent us from doing so. And I think this is something very important. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I forgot to say that if you in the audience have an immediate questions after each of the contributors here, you might raise your hand. If you don't do it now, you can wait till we are done with all the presenters. Now I leave the floor over to Roberta Capello, please.
Okay,
you can
I
stand
have
there.
Some slides.
Yeah, you can be.
Well. I can go there. The clicker is there. Okay, I come here so that I can. Okay, thank you very much. So here I have a big, let's say, challenge. That is to say, to show that what academicians do is vital or is important, has a value for policymakers. And this is what drove us over the last 10 years in order to try to measure the impact of these borders. So they are vital, we know, also from case studies. They cut cooperation. So let's try to find out a way to measure these types of barriers. And this is why we started, let's say, a little bit by chance, because we participated in 2016 with, and this is something that I'm doing, sorry, I forgot to mention, with Andrea Caraglio. And we started with a project in 2016 dealing and trying to measure the presence of borders. And then we developed this idea and went through a series of projects. And I will drive you quickly through them in order to show what we found out. So these are the regions that we are speaking about. So these are the border regions in terms of land border regions and of the maritime borders. And these are the ones that are subject to, that are, let's say, eligible for Interreg programs that the speaker before was speaking about. So we have these borders and these areas that suffer from the presence of the borders. So we started at that time, and we knew that when the first project started, there was the idea that the research on border effects was dominated by the neoclassical paradigm. And in particular, there was this McCallum paper of 1995, which was interpreting borders as something that was hampering international trade. So he was measuring that through the existence of tariffs, linking border effects to pure demand side effects, and dealing with the effects of borders on trade as a proxy of economic performance. We tried to innovate on that, and we tried to move to a supply side approach. And in the first project, we launched the methodology with which we wanted to test and to measure the importance, the presence of a border on the capacity of a region, of those regions, the border regions, to grow. And we divided the issues of a border in terms of endowment, resources. So these regions may suffer from an endowment, from a lack of resources due to the presence of the border. And we, concerning the environment, we did a simple t-test capturing the differences in endowments of resources, as what was mentioned, schools, hospitals, and whatever, but also productive resources, industrial resources. And when the statistical effect turned out to be positive and significant, there was a potential endowment effect. So there were different in terms of endowment. But whether this leads to what we call an actual endowment need, that is to say, this lack of resources turn into a lack of growth, is something that we tested through an econometric exercise there. And then we added the fact that if you have a border, you do not only lack a resource, but those resources that you have may be less efficiently exploited. So we ran the exercise on the regions that I showed, so that's 3 regions that I showed, and we found out that exactly what we expected. They have, they have a lack of endowment, and again, they have a lack of efficiency in using them. But this can be different for the different borders and regions. And in fact, what was interesting is that we could find regions, in the ones that are circled, that have a high endowment of resources. So they are not, let's say, they don't suffer from the lack of resources, but they use it in a very inefficient way. So we combined the two, and we suggested policies, different policies for the different situations that these regions could face. Then we moved with another project. This was only the physical border up to now, but then we tried to disentangle the different types of barriers that the presence of a physical border led to border regions. And we specifically tried to disentangle the institutional borders, no free movement of people, different currencies, lack of cooperation history, from the physical borders, rivers, mountains, and the socio-cultural borders, so perceived language barriers, perceived trust barriers, perceived legal administrative barriers. These are all barriers that are linked to the presence of an international border. And this allowed us to conclude that borders are not only about material barriers, but there are also the intangible obstacles and intangible barriers that affect the dynamics of these regions. The same methodology was applied to understand exactly what was mentioned before, how much these regions lack or, let's say, lose in terms of potential uses of resources that are exactly on the other side of the international border. And so we came up with different situations in which we have regions that have low asset endowment, and at the same time they have either a high efficiency of using external resources or a low efficiency of using external borders, and the same in terms of international borders. So we could play with that, and we came up with the different types of regions that really are affected by different types of borders and types of barriers, and this was the same in terms of the high asset endowment. Then again, the world moved in a more complicated way, and so borders were again there, and we had to study both the Brexit first, and then the COVID-19 effect. And so, again, borders, instead of going down, grew up. And concerning Brexit, we calculated the impact that market-side restrictions would have on trade flows if all countries would have increased their legal and administrative barriers. In other terms, we tried to see how the impact would have been if all European member states would have chosen something like a Brexit, so to increase their administrative and border barriers. So we complicated our story by finding out different types of effect, the exposure effect due to the different openness of regions. We highlighted the centrality effect due to the different accessibility of regions in spatial terms. We have a demand concentration effect due to the different closeness of regions to trade partners, and the border effect due to the different distance of regions from the borders. So we had, this was the map of the results in that case. As you see, if borders, administrative and legal barriers goes up, those, of course, that suffer the most are those that are close to the borders, but this is interesting because, sorry, I thought it was mentioned there, because this is the same between Western and Eastern countries. There is no much difference, but for example, Germany is something that is a country that suffered less. So there is quite a lot under this map. But then we moved to apply our methodology to the cost of non-Europe. And this was something that we are not the first that have done that. We have the Shapiro report where we tried to measure. So we have also, sorry, the Cecchini report, I'm sorry, the other one is the Cecchini report in 1988, where we have, which was the most the frequently applied method was the gravity model. And this was the way in which they measured the political barriers to trade flows. Here, in our methodology, we invented a new one, and we tried to simulate so we did a simulation procedure which is based on calculating the difference between GDP growth of land border regions under the assumptions that legal and administrative borders were removed, and with respect to the actual one. So the difference between a situation where you have no borders and a situation where you still have the borders, so the actual one, provides you with the cost of non-Europe. And this is the result at the country level. You see that, the situation differs in terms of countries. also because it depends on the number of regions that are close to a border, but each of them is present. In aggregate terms, we found out that the GDP loss for a non-Europe situation would have been 3% for what concerns with respect of, in terms of EU GDP. So Europe would have lost 3% of its GDP. And in terms of the land border regions, this would have become nearly 9% of the GDP of border regions. So that's the quantification and the interval, the confidence interval of our estimates. Then we moved on with another project, which was done. All these projects were asked by DG Regio. This is one of the most recent one, where we were asked to calculate the cost of COVID-19 for border regions, in terms of both the partial closures that we had and the the full-fledged stay-at-home measures that we had to follow because of the COVID-19. And we were asked to do that before the data on 2020 were available. So thanks to our forecasting model, we managed to predict the 2020 GDP growth rate of regions, and we managed to get the results that I show you. This is the cost for both EU and border regions of the partial closures for the periods in which we closed partially the borders and for the problem of the health problem that we encountered. And this created a 1% loss of GDP at the EU level and 2.4 in terms of the border regions GDP. So BGDP loss was more than the half for border regions. And this is the map of the losses. So GDP losses appear rather evenly distributed than between eastern and western part of the EU 27. Higher GDP losses in the northern part of the continent, as you can see. So the red is the highest loss in terms of GDP with respect to the yellow one. We have a concentration of losses in non-urban areas, with a few notable exceptions that are mentioned there, and higher losses in land border regions than in maritime. And these are the costs instead of the periods where we had strong lockdowns, so where we were totally closed. And this created more than 500 billion losses in GDP all over Europe, which means 4.4% lower GDP growth in EU 27 and something like 10% less loss for the border regions. So, and this is the map of the full-fledged stay-at-home measures and the costs for this situation. As you can see, the most hit areas are border regions are those that belong to the countries that were mostly hit by COVID-19. First of all, Italy, followed by Spain and part of France, and then the eastern part was relatively less hit by this situation, by the health problems, and therefore by the totally closed measure. So costs are asymmetric, and this is very interesting. See, for instance, the borders between Italy and Austria. In the Italian areas, we have a strong loss, and the other side of the border, we have a lower ones. Or Germany and France, as you can see. again, there are substantial country effects. So to conclude, this was a brief overview of what we did over nearly 10 years of research program. So I think that what we managed in our little role was to show that the importance of measuring border effects. It's not only a matter of having good case studies, but also showing that is a loss. The presence of borders is a loss in terms of socioeconomic performance, because also this type of GDP loss creates, of course, losses in terms of jobs. And this is something that I didn't show, but that we measured. International borders matter, so they create losses, and they are sources of tangible and intangible barriers that are even nearly more important than the tangible ones. The COVID-19 pandemic period did not help in this respect. We went a step further with respect to cooperation, and this is why this research program continues, and we were asked by DG Regio to rerun the estimates with real data now that exist on 2020 and see whether our losses were, let's say, that we estimated are confirmed with the real data. But we hope that all this work, which is also in progress, helps policymakers to understand that this is a real problem. And hopefully, with our work, we help policymakers to make our perspective to be the one as a bird that sees, as in the quotation, no border in our world. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Roberta. See no one waving, so I give the floor immediately to Ricardo Pereira. You want to stand there? Yep,
well,
please.
I have the clicker as well.
Sure.
Thank you. There is a PowerPoint presentation as well. Should I click? There it is. One thing Roberta forgot to say, her study is the dark blue that is there available for you to have a printed copy. Well, I should start by saying that I'm really pleased to be here and really pleased to have been invited to organize this session. And that was confirmed yesterday in the plenary where Sarah Lowe was debating, and she was questioning the audience, asking how many of you in the academic career are really valued by doing policy influence? And everyone said, not me. Well, there is a big issue, and that's why it is interesting to have this session, is precisely because there is a clear need for the academia and policy making to be closer together. And here we have an example of academia and policy making working together. Academia producing what policy making is asking for, which has a significant impact in policy design. This is quite interesting from my perspective. Well, I work with borders. I like borders. It's an amazing subject of interest. When we start telling stories, we would never stop. Slavomir Tokarski told about the story of Barla Hertog on the border between the Netherlands and Belgium. Well, that's one interesting example where you see absurd things appearing. You always assume that the border is something that you cross horizontally. Taking a step, you cross the border. Well, in that border, you can cross vertically. There is one building where the ground floor is Belgium, the first floor is Netherlands, the second floor is Belgium again. I may have mixed Belgium and Netherlands, I don't know which is left and which is right, but there are strange stories about even vertical borders. Sounds surreal, it is real. When we start discussing about borders, we must start by thinking, questioning what are we talking about. Because frequently we talk about borders from the perception of a line. A border is a line that divides two territories. The border is the limit of my data in regional policy. I look at the data within this territory that is very clearly defined in administrative terms and therefore in statistical terms. We should go beyond that. We should be capable to look at the border from the territorial perspective. The border being not the line, but the region, the territory that touches upon the line. And there we start seeing what are the limitations, what are the problems, because the goal is clearly to promote the development of those territories. That picture is there just for illustrative purposes. It's an amazing job done by the JRC. You have the link on the left, defining what is the border territory based on time distance of driving to the closest crossing point. The different yellows represent 30, 60, 90 minutes, and you see that sometimes you may be in the line but not capable to cross the border. And then we start getting to the concept of obstacles. Because we're economists and geographers, most of us. We like to discuss about development of territories. And we assume people have a natural territory, a catchment area of influence. And that area of influence is a certain radius, a circle around me on your right-hand side, with a radius depending on the function that you're developing. If I am a pizza delivery person, I deliver a pizza within 4 kilometers from the oven. Yes, but then we see that in some territories, this is not the case. And here is where we start having the border effect. And here is where we start putting questions to our policy conceptions. We have a border represented on your left circle by the red line that hampers interactions, whatever these interactions are. And this border effect that you know perfectly well does exist even within the single market. Even within the single market, where we assume that we can cross the border, sometimes we cannot that much. And some other times we perceive that we cannot. There's always the issue of the border effects on perception and not on reality in some cases. I work for the European Commission. I'm here with Sławomir Tokarski, also working for the European Commission. We could say the boss of Interreg. Interreg is cross-border cooperation. We should ask, why is the European Commission intervening here? This is an academic conference. Why are we intervening in cross-border cooperation? Well, because it is a public problem. It is a public policy problem. Why is it a public policy problem? Well, first of all, because it is not peanuts. We tend to assume when we look to the program of a conference, many of us say, borders, those tiny little things, I don't go to that session, I'll go to some other session. Well, it's 1/3 of the EU population. Secondly, there is a huge economic impact, like the work that Roberta and Andrea have created. If we solve 20% of border obstacles, only 20%, if we solve 20% of border obstacles, we get 2% increase of GDP. That is an enormous economic impact. Thirdly, because there is an element of discrimination. If I have a car accident in the middle of a country, whatever country it is, I will be driven by an ambulance to the closest hospital. If I have a car accident by the border and the closest hospital happens to be just there, across the border, this can be across the street, Well, I'll be taken 100 kilometers to the closest hospital in the same country because of the legality of the ambulance to cross the border. This is a clear element of discrimination, represented also by the example of the public services, the management of the ways to be different into different sides of the street. Because of this, there is clear element for both academic intervention here. The matters of border effect are clearly in the economic literature. There is a clear political impact and for political intervention. What am I going to present? The focus of my presentation story, I always start telling stories. The focus of my presentation is what are we, the European Commission, doing to try to cooperate to solve border obstacles? What do we do to promote cross-border cooperation? First and foremost, we do Interreg. Interreg has been the trigger of cross-border cooperation in Europe in the past 30 years. In the slide, I'm coming from the top left to the right. Interreg has been the trigger. In many cases, we see that it was because there was a budget that was the trigger for different administrations to get together and start talking as they never did before. Interreg, whenever we look to different evaluation of impacts, as the biggest multiplier effects of public investment. And Interreg has this virus effect. We like to play. You come to work in the cross-border unit, you never leave because you are infected by the cooperation virus. That was so well illustrated by the different examples of where we assume there would be no cooperation, but people still want to cooperate. Nevertheless, Interreg has shown us one thing. It's not enough to have financial support if we have legal and administrative obstacles. That is why we started this work that we call the border focal point. I make a reference to the papers on the tops of your seats. The smallest, the light blue one is a catalog of all the different publications we have produced. We have been producing this with this border focal point team. We have been introducing political support, technical support, and legal tools. We'll talk about the legal tools later. I'll be only talking now mostly about B solutions. B solutions is this element of piloting with B solutions. When we think in policy making, we implicitly assume, we all as human beings, implicitly assume that policy making is done someone there having bright ideas, discussing with a few assistants and coming to the conclusions and then imposing these policies from bottom to down. We all have this perception, more or less. It's not necessarily done like this. And what we are doing is precisely trying to invert a little bit with this B solution. What we are trying to do with B solutions is to go to the different borders and get clear images, clear stories, clear ways of operating of how these border obstacles influence the society and what should be done and what can be introduced in policy making. The methodology is quite interesting. We have a grant agreement with that AEBR, the logo in green and red, the Association of European Border Regions. They contract experts. I must make a parenthesis. I am in an academic community now. They contract experts. Experts typically come from academia. We have a call for experts in the stand outside there. Close parenthesis. They contract experts into the different cases of obstacles that regions propose. We use one of those experts to do a legal analysis of the case, of the border obstacle, and to identify what could be the solution. And the obstacle for the ambulances perhaps could be a bilateral agreement between the two states that would allow the ambulance from one side to go to the closest hospital on the other side. Perhaps it could be. It identifies this solution, and then it passes to the member state. This is most helpful if we look at the process for the single region that was piloted, because they get a clear identification of what are the causes of this obstacle, and they get a pathway for a possible solution. Then there is the need to push for the implementation by the competent authorities. But if we look to the entire set, and that's why you have a circle around, not precisely a circle, that's more a rectangle, around the entire process, we also get the knowledge on obstacles. And this knowledge on obstacles allows us to shape up policies. That is why for us the piloting is so important, so that we can better design, we can altogether better design policies by having knowledge on the processes. Very short reference to this, what we call the Pillar 2. For some cases, we are also implementing this Pillar 2, by which we are inviting the competent authorities to create, to de facto implement a solution that was identified in the first version. Interesting to know this, from a research perspective, this is a wealth of information. We have now 150, I don't know the exact number, 100-something cases reported, for each of them a detailed analysis on the obstacle, which provide a wealth of data for research on policy, for research on obstacles. B-Solutions is just a piloting initiative, but it shows one thing. It shows that we can de facto solve border obstacles, and that Interreg can have a strong power there, and that it helps us shaping a bit of Interreg. Let's take a bit of a look to the first 90 cases of what did we find when looking at the set of cases. When we look to the first set of cases, we introduced a simple methodology. For each of the cases we have, it's based on case studies, we have one expert report. We did a joint and classification and clustering of the different reports, and I trying to identify what are the causes, what are the solutions. Thus, moving from the level of this specific case to the grosso modo to the macro perspective of what do these cases tell us about obstacles on the border. One detail, the bottom arrow, in the catalogs that you will find in the stand out there, you will have on the end of each case, you will have a link for the specific detailed report of each of them. So the catalogs out there in the small stand by the registration desk are the wealth of information that you can have. What we see on these 90 cases, on these first 90 cases, their proponent type, we see that several of them are cross-border structures in the GTCs. The information we get here is the entities that are applying to be solutions are entities that do understand the border, so we are getting the entities that, in fact, could be the initiators in the perspective of the facilitating cross-border solutions. And then we start getting interesting messages. What are the main obstacles? And the main obstacles are clearly legal obstacles. There is a clear indication that the main obstacles are legal, and then there are a significant proportion of administrative obstacles. Where do we find legal obstacles? What does it mean, a legal obstacle? It's when we have some legislation or lack of it that impedes some interaction. And we can see here from different perspectives. We can see that in some cases, it is the different legal frameworks applicable on one side or the other of the border. The classic example of the sirens, of the ambulances. I have an accident, the closest hospital is right there. But on the side of the border where I am, the ambulance is supposed to have a blue siren. On the side of the hospital of the border where the hospital is, the ambulance is supposed to have a yellow siren. Therefore, because this is national competence, therefore, crossing the border would be illegal. Therefore, I'm taken 100 kilometers away. If there is a risk of heart attack, 100 kilometers away may mean I am dead. Different legal frameworks have a different are legal. No one is breaching the law. No one is doing anything unlawfully. The law itself is not compatible with my neighbor's law. This is a significant type of obstacle. The second one is when we have the national law does not consider the existence of the other side of the border, spatial planning. Spatial planning just ends there. Networks of infrastructure just end there. And they assume they would be continued on the other side. But I'm the Ministry for Infrastructure, I don't have competence on the other side, so I don't do it. Third case, there is no mandate to intervene on the other side. One very short story. Lithuania, Poland, one small village on Poland, very close to another small village on Lithuania, very close to another, very far away from everything else in their countries. They have a common obstacle of water supply, drinking water supply. The technical solution is a joint network. The political willingness, let's do it. The funding, let's do it. Legal competence to do it, none of the two municipalities has legal competence to supply water to the other side. This is a legal obstacle impeding a societal beneficial situation. What are the root causes? The root causes, if we look at this, majority are based on national law. If you sum national law and sub-national law, regional law, you see that it's the vast majority. Also there it's significant, the proportion of cases with European Union law. Take into account that in that element we include situations where the transposition of EU law is creating the obstacle. Therefore, where is the boundary between national law and transposition of European law? We can classify this also as national law. But it's interesting to perceive that it's very frequent the national legal framework not taking into account the national legal framework on the other side that's causing the obstacle. And what are the proposed solutions? The majority of the cases the experts have pointed to bilateral agreements because that's what's available at the moment. But here I put the link to in the second line there, ECBM potential. ECBM, that is now called Facilitating Cross-Border Solutions, was the proposal when these 90 cases were considered, they talked about ECBM. This is the proposal for creating a EU regulation that would allow the border region to put up a case for a solution at national level. This is called now, it's a EU proposal, and it's interesting to see that even though this was not yet adopted, there was already 1/3 of the cases where the experts were saying this can be the solution for this case. Imagine if the solution was already adopted. Finally, there is a few differences across sectors. I have already spoken too much. I'll not go in detail in this one. This is also giving a hint on the wealth of information that's available there to do some research. There are not that many differences between the different sectors. There is a greater proportion of legal obstacles when we talk about the sector of cross-border public services, most likely because the sector of public services is more highly regulated, therefore the appearance of more legal obstacles than administrative obstacles could be one of the reasons why. Not clear, we don't have information on that element. Also interesting to see the different actions that the different cases have been pointing. And this is going beyond what these cases were asked to do. They already included different elements to propose. I talk too much, always, sorry. Just a few conclusions. Cross-border obstacles, they do exist. They have a significant importance, and they do hamper the development of cross-border territories. Therefore, we can and we must take action in preventing them. And one of those actions is to be taken at your level, the research community. We do need more research to support good policy making on these elements. One last bit of a little of promotion out there, just by the registration desk, you have several publications, this wealth of information I was talking about. So we keep on producing new stories, as you see there, one from 2024, and some research on reflections, but the conclusion is this big arrow on your left side. There by the stand, I keep available to discuss whatever, whenever. Thank you. Sorry I spoke too much.
Thank you very much. And finally, I give the floor to the Would you like the microphone? Yes.
Thank you very much. Before starting, I would like to thank wholeheartedly the organizers of the conference for inviting me, the Regional Science Association International, and of course the John von Neumann University at Kecskemét. I have also a presentation. I hope it will appear on the screen. Wonderful. Thank you very much. So I try to give you some examples of concrete solutions which have been adopted after you've seen all the problems. Concrete solutions which have been adopted locally, sometimes with the help of national authorities, and concrete solutions which in most cases are imperfect because they've been achieved through, I would say, through some kind of improvisation and with people who understood the problem, the legal problem, but who could not always change the law. So they had to find bypasses to design pragmatical solutions. I will start with the field of transportation. Transportation is the mother of all battles in cross-border cooperation. Basically, most problems arise from a lack of transport, I would say in the long term, because if transports were perfect, there would be so much exchanges, so much flows, that in the economic theory, just factors would adjust to each other and would migrate and would even themselves on both sides of the border. So basically transport is how the adventure of cross-border cooperation starts. It's the basis of everything, and I would say it's half of my time negotiating with transport authorities so that they could devote more resources to cross-border links. So you see that this, I would say this conclusion on transport is slightly optimistic because you have very powerful initiatives, for example, in some EGTCs, but on the whole, problems persist. So the recent initiatives, I would say, from the new generation, I would say initiatives which emerge with the EGTCs are about ticketing. And there have been very interesting ideas which have been fulfilled. The most compelling one, in my opinion, is the fact that you have on the territory of big EGTC, which brings together Tyrol, South Tyrol, and Trentino, you have a common ticket. It has started in 2021 as a student ticket for approximately 280 euros, something like this, and it was to be extended this year to all population for a slightly higher amount. And with that ticket, you could take any means of transportation except for speed trains in Italy. But it's still a lot. If you can take regional trains, buses, that's a lot. You have some of it in the in the Rhine-Maas region, but it's a smaller region. So it's not as powerful as I would say, because the Rhine-Maas region, I would say it's a big urban region, but it's not at the scale of would it be NUTS 3 for Tyrol? Yes, it's not at the scale of NUTS 3. So for the moment, that's my success stories. But you still have incredible problems in the field of ticketing. And if you try to understand how to structure the potential progress, first, you don't see when you book a ticket on one national website, or when you go to the teller at the station, the employees of the national railway company won't be able to give you access. They won't be able to see even what is on offer on the other side of the border. And then, if you develop the visibility of each national system towards the outward network, the network abroad, even if you manage to do this, there will be a problem in pricing, because there won't be agreement on how to price these tickets which go abroad. And you will even have a possibility to save some money if you buy a ticket in your country from the other side, or a ticket which is slightly cross-border, but which you will use internally, and if you buy it from the other side. So the national railway companies haven't been able to, first, to provide a comprehensive view of their respective offers, and second, to negotiate a comprehensive and unified tariff for even the most important fares. When they have a unified tariff, for example, I guess that between Paris and Barcelona, you have a unified tariff between both companies, more or less, then you realize that each company puts on offer only a certain proportion of the available tickets, for two reasons. Because they divide the tickets between themselves. The French company and the Spanish company will divide the quantity. So the French allocation might be fully booked, and you might no longer be able to see a ticket on the French website, and still you would find tickets on the Spanish website. That's the first problem. The second problem is that in transport across Europe, you always have a choice to make between short and long distance fares. And some countries have managed to combine short and long distance trains, such as Denmark and Sweden. For example, when you start from Copenhagen, you can go all the way up to Stockholm, or you can go to Malmö. It will just take 30 minutes or 5 hours, depending on what you choose. But you have both possibilities from the station in Copenhagen. Although it's a cross-border connection. If you try to do this between France and Germany, it's much more complicated. If you try to do this between France and Great Britain, for example, with the passage of time, short distance trains have disappeared, and you can no longer travel from one shore to the other. You can just travel between Paris and London, but you can no longer cross the channel on a train. So this is the counterexample, and we have the same problem between, I was talking about Paris and Barcelona. It's very difficult to find a local train just to go from Perpignan to Barcelona because it's too close, and the railway companies deem that they don't make enough money on this. So it's just to give you a flavor of all the problems we have to solve in the field of transportation. And I'm not even talking about infrastructures. I'm just talking with the existing infrastructures. I don't know about the problems between Hungary and its neighbors, but I would be very surprised if there weren't the same problems along your borders. And there is always a border crossing effect. The price is always significantly higher if you include a border in a long distance train. For example, Paris-Barcelona is not much longer than Paris-Perpignan, but it's much more expensive. So there's a huge work to be done, and I know that the Commission has started to do it about improving the exchange of information between national railway companies and then promoting a unified ticketing system. Health is, I would say, it's the second aspiration of people living in border regions. They want to have better access to health for two reasons. Because historically, they have been neglected compared to people living in more central areas. Historically, you have less public services in border regions than in central areas for obvious historical reasons. And second, because usually in border regions, people realize that there's a side of the border where the offer is better, because you have more physicians, more medical personnel, more hospitals. And so, of course, it raises the aspirations of the people, and they want to have better care. For the moment, when I say we, I mean collectively, also with the help of the Commission, we found two ways to improve health offer along the borders. Basically, you have two systems. In the first system, you have access to everything on the other side without having to fill a special form to ask for permission to be treated on the other side, and you will be reimbursed depending on the type of medicine you receive. You will be reimbursed according to the norms of the other side or of your own country. So you will receive something and you can be treated for anything, but of course it's very costly for the ministries of health. So that system, which has been promoted between France and Belgium, is no longer popular within our Ministry of Health. And you have another system, which is now the one which we see developing along certain borders, and which has definitely probably more room for progress, which is the system in which you work on complementarities. So you look at the other side, you see what is better done on the other side. Usually it's something that you don't even have on your side, and you try to build complementarities. But then you have two sorts of obstacles. First, of course, it costs money, because it means that people will be better treated than they ever were before, so it will be costly. And you have to negotiate the way these cares will be reimbursed. And second, you have a sort of medical protectionism, I would say, with some hospitals on the side where access is not so easy. Some hospitals, usually they are not so close to the border, which will fear that they have less patients, and so that they will receive less financing. So this is a usual problem. You will have hospitals, let's say 50 kilometers away from the border, which will say, please don't take these patients from us. Okay, it would be much more efficient for them to be treated just across the border, but if we lose them, we will lose our service, and there might be any more, there could be simply no treatment available anymore for our local patients 50 kilometers away from the border. I give just a funny example about giving birth, because it's something you find along all borders. Oh, yes, thank you very much. I was still, yeah. It's funny because it relates, of course, to our own identity, to our country of citizenship. How do you register a baby who is born across the border? Usually the parents have to bring the birth certificate to their consulate general in the capital of the other country, to have everything certified before they can come back to their own country and ascertain that the child has their nationality. And it's a complicated procedure, of course. Well, you might ask me in the first place, why do some women give birth on the other side of the border? Well, basically, sometimes it's easier because the first maternity ward on the mother's territory might be 50 kilometers away, further inside the country. So you have a lot of examples, probably also along the borders of Hungary, where it's more convenient and less risky for the mother and the child to give birth on the other side of the border. And what is funny is that some municipalities, I would say, maybe some countries, but it's more at the local level that it's been treated, have found a way to avoid that bypass by the consulate general, which is so costly in time and probably money. And the funniest way I've found is in the Ardennes. The Ardennes, it's a small mountainous region which is shared between France and Belgium. And there's a city, Givet, which is on French territory, but it's surrounded by Belgium. So the children in Givet, most of them are born in Dinan, in the neighboring Belgian city. And of course, the parents would have to go to Brussels, to the Consulate General, to have the birth certificate being certified and all this. But actually, they do it in a much simpler way. Children are registered in Givet, in France, with the mention on their ID that they were born in Dinan, but as if Dinan was a French city. I mean, they don't take into account the fact that it's abroad. And so far, no one has complained. And I think it's the easiest way to do it. So, I give another example which Ricardo has evoked about emergency services. I will go quicker because we have less time, but basically you have all sorts of regimes in operation. Sometimes you have real agreement which enable cross-interventions. In most cases, they're still governed by customary law, but there is an increasing fear that it might lead to judicial difficulties. So we notice at the moment that there's an effort everywhere to give a legal basis to these cross-interventions. But for the moment, I would say there's no coherence in the way it happens. All sorts of models can be observed, and it seems that some overall coordination would be needed so that every new system at least bases itself on what exists in other places so as to maximize what is included in the agreement. I will go very quickly over tax issues. The main issue is how you re-equilibrate, or how you correct the imbalance when you have thousands of people flocking in the morning to the neighboring country, paying their taxes there, and coming back in the evening and using public services where they live in their residential country. There's one big system of fiscal return, of compensation given by the taxing country to the residential country, which is the Geneva compensation. And on other borders, there have been attempts by the local authorities to obtain the same sort of compensation. Of course, you have smaller compensations on other borders in Europe. You have that between, for example, Luxembourg and Belgium. But as far as France is concerned, we have that only with the canton of Geneva. And if you want to have some money return from the taxes which are paid abroad, there are other ways than just receiving a regular check every year. And this is what I mentioned here. If there are some questions, I can develop later, the different ways of getting some money back. About the EGTCs, much has been said already. I think this is a structure of the future. I mean, they will probably continue to develop everywhere in Europe because basically they can offer public services across the border. And it's very interesting that now some EGTCs also manage Interreg funds through the small fund projects. And I will finish on the FCBS, which is the new name of the ECBM. It has been mentioned several times before. Let me just remind you that the basic idea is quite old, actually. You have several examples of this idea's implementation, which dates back to the 19th century, to the building of rail links. Some rail links cross other countries before reaching their destination in the same country as their starting point. It's the case, for example, with the Karlsruhe-Konstanz train line, which goes twice through Switzerland in between. And as early as 1852, it was already agreed between the two countries that the train will be constructed and operate only under German law. We have an example of that also between France and Italy. We have the tunnel of the Mont-Cenis, which is divided in its middle by the borderline, but at the same time it is entirely under Italian law for security and transport regulations. And so the idea of the FCBS is, to summarize, is to enable partners to adopt, when needed, an ad hoc legal solution to overcome possible border obstacles. And this idea has been proposed again in 2015 by the Luxembourg presidency of the EU. Then it has become a proposal of the European Commission in 2018. We, the French, were delighted to see this idea as the basis of a regulation proposal, but we were wondering at that time when is it going to be an applicable regulation? So since we were in the process of negotiating bilateral treaties with our neighbors, we decided to take that idea into our bilateral treaties. And so we have it now in 3 treaties with Germany, Italy, and Spain. And we've been delighted again when the Commission has decided to propose a second version of its regulation to overcome some resistance among some member states. And it seems that the proposal is now on a good track. Discussions continue. And we hope to see a result in a few months, maybe under Hungarian presidency. So thank you very much for your attention. And I guess that now we'll be happy to receive some questions.
Thank you very much, all of you, for very interesting contributions. And before I leave the floor open for questions and for discussion between you, I would like to come with some comments from what I would say an outsider, which means that it is in the 1990s I was dealing with some cross-border research in Scandinavia. The last project I had was about the Öresund bridge, the bridge between Sweden and Denmark that was inaugurated the year 2000. It was a project about the purchasing trips across the Sound, together with a Danish colleague. And we collected a lot of data, but the most significant change that the bridge brought when it comes to purchasing was that before the bridge, Swedes went over to Denmark and bought a lot of beer. Not very surprising, because at that time, beer in Sweden, the same Carlsberg beer in Sweden, was 3 times more expensive than in Denmark. After the bridge, Swedes went over to Denmark and bought even more beer. So that quite trivial result was my exit from border research. But there was a lot of research at that time about the Öresund region, and there was questions saying how to create an Öresund region. Today you never hear about the Öresund region, Sweden and Denmark, really. Because there are things that are a bit more problematic than just the legal borders. So, as I haven't been into this research for a quarter of a century, my first reaction when I saw the headline for this talk, the legal obstacles, was that, oh, are they still important? Haven't they solved this? Are not the cultural borders and the obstacles more important nowadays? And just to give an example and go back to the Öresund bridge, was that 1 year after the bridge was finished, the Swedish television, one of the channels, had a program about the effects of the bridge and so on, and many people said, okay, I'm going over to Denmark more than I did before. But they also had an interview with a young Danish family. They had 2 children, and they said, yeah, we was thinking really about moving over to the Malmö side, because housing is much cheaper there, and then commuting over to Denmark and so on. That would give us a better economy. But, said the woman, then we realized that our children then would be Swedes. They stayed in Denmark. And I think this is just an example. But I think what we haven't discussed very much here is, of course, how the cultural differences, the cultural barriers are there still within our heads, and also how they then form obstacles to changing legislations and so on. So this might be also something to think about and continue research about. Anyone want to comment? Yes, please.
First of all, an invitation. Out there in the stand, we have a sequence of videos. One of them is precisely about Öresund, the CEO of the Greater Copenhagen region, making a statement on how difficult, even in a place where strong cross-border cooperation is taken by granted, how difficult it is for people to work on one side and live on the other. We have there a story going, it's quite interesting to see it. This element of the perceived obstacles and the intensity of obstacles and how they should have disappeared. The more that we cooperate, the more we will see our differences. If my neighbor lives 5 kilometers away, if I'm in the middle of North Sweden and my neighbor lives 5 kilometers away, I have nothing against him. I have no problems. If I have the Danube in the middle and 0 bridges, I have 0 problems. But if I live close to my neighbor and we have a good cooperation and we share the transport of the kids for the same school, I am also close enough to see that the person plays saxophone at 4 a.m. in the morning, or that he gets that I'm Portuguese and I make barbecues with smelly sardines. And we start having, from the cooperation, we start having the obstacles, and they tend to exist. That's why we talk about solving 20% of the obstacles. The obstacles will always be there, but we need to be aware and continuous. It's a continuous process of identifying and solving and identifying and solving. The element of cultural obstacles and perception of the border is also very strong. I remember doing some research a few years ago in a past life. We were asking small, medium-sized companies about business models, mapping clear regional economics, a mapping of industrial parks, etc., etc. So we were doing interviews to SMEs. And there were a few SMEs which were just by the border, just there. This was the Portuguese-Spanish border. And I remember asking a few business people about their companies, and they were very proudly saying, I already sell 500 kilometers from here, I have already expanded to the other extreme of Portugal. And I asked, and do you sell 5 kilometers away to the closest Spanish city? And they would look at me saying, can I? As if I was putting the most stupid question ever. It's also the issue of perception indeed.
And please come with questions, and Andrea is, we can start with Joseph. It's closer. And then you can give Andrea.
Yes, thank you very much. So first of all, on behalf of the organizers and the university, thank you very much for this very, very exciting panel discussion. And I have 2 motivations to talk here. One motivation is clearly a geographical, because we are also being in a border region, and we have around 90 or 100 kilometers shared borders with Serbia. And just I can recall that in the process of Interreg projects, we were also trying to apply in a way of scientific cooperation. And this is another wave what I would like to add to all those layers of cooperation. And here I regretfully report that we were not successful in the latest IPA Interreg projects, applying with a scientific cooperation project between the chambers of commerce and different universities just next to the border on Serbia and here. But I would like to draw the attention also on this line of possibilities to cooperate with the support of such a great program. And the other one, and forgive me if I will be a bit vulgar, but it's with an intention, and it's literally a story. If I am correct, then there is a great positive story of cooperation, cross-border cooperation, and it's a European country. It's in Cyprus. And you all know the situation in Cyprus, and I think that the cultural differences between the Turkish and Greek Cypriots are obvious, and the tension which is still there after 50 years of the civil war in Cyprus, it's an obvious obstacle. And I was really amazed by the amount of legal obstacles what Ricardo has mentioned in his presentation, and at the same time, always the solution depends on how deep the shit around us is. And sorry to say that I was literally meaning it, because the Cypriots have managed in 1978, just 6 years after the genocides on both sides of the Turkish and the Greek sides of the country, to create a common sewerage system for Nicosia, the capital of Cyprus, on clear and obvious reasons, which were beneficial for both of them. And I think that if they were able to do that just after 6 years, with living memories, all the violence which took place on both borders, then I think that we are in a very favorized position here in Europe, and I think that we need to do everything what we can for such benefits of cross-border cooperation. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah, can you please give the
Yes.
phone to Andrea also, and if we have someone more in the audience that want to comment or ask any question, we take them before we get the phone back here to you here.
Yeah, I'm going to try and be very quick, and thank you for all presentations because they nicely fit together and they provide a great landscape of how policy making and research can go hand in hand and provide insights. I'm not sure this is the right crowd to ask these two questions, but this is related to how the legal and administrative costs that are associated with the borders and were highlighted in all presentations basically, can be technically addressed by policies that are structurally underfunded. Because we are talking about things that imply a huge coordination among countries in Europe, the willingness to delegate power so that it's not the country mandate to address this, because legal differences are by definition differences across countries, and whether there's any effort being made to increase the budget dedicated to cross-border cooperation rather than keeping on biting on this funding that are deviated to other potentially less relevant or less impactful type of policies. Thank you.
Thank you. So, who wants to start? Yep. Yes.
Maybe on Cyprus, and thank you for this example. But clearly, I mean, this type of cross-border cooperation is possible when the biggest political solution can be found, and then Interreg can come in as the first type of cooperation when the overall political climate is improved. And I think this is the example also of the program that we have between Ireland and Northern Ireland, which is called PEACE, and which was precisely designed for this post-conflict way of solving the problems, the perceptions, the enmities that took place during the 2 decades that were preceding the end of the armed conflict there. So there is also this potential of post-conflict resolution, which is quite important, and which might actually come in play once, hopefully, the Gaza conflict is over. And by the way, and this takes me back to the question on Cyprus, we are receiving some signals that there would be maybe in a couple of years' time possible to come back to the cross-border cooperation between Greece and Turkey, which is not taking place right now. On maybe the cost of finding solutions, I mean, on one hand, the funding from Interreg is helpful because we have this specific objective one, a specific meaning that it exists only for Interreg cooperation, and this objective is also based on scientific cooperation and scientific research, because in 2015 we did cross-border review, and the results of this cross-border bring to us this idea of creating the objective where the main aim is improving cooperation, finding new forms of cooperation, or spotting obstacles to cooperation. So in this sense, Interreg is helpful. And as we see, this was very well taken by all the programs, because I think around 90% of all the programs is actually using this measure in the current funding period. I don't believe it is so costly for the member states to do. I mean, we hear this argument in the Council, but we have a bit of difficulty of grasping it, because what we are talking about right now is basically the system under which who have a problem in the cross-border interaction due to the legal or administrative obstacles, I can come with this program and found one single point where they will take care of it, at least in a sense of looking at it and telling me that they will do nothing. So this is basically the issue of finding the address where people would be empowered to receive my complaint and see whether they can do something about it or not. And this remains entirely the national competence, because in the end it would be the German or French legal system that will make an exception for a particular project and say that on this particular project we'll apply this and this solution, or we'll make exception for our legal system, but then it remains totally within national jurisprudence. So there is no cession or delegation of this power to somebody else, and certainly not to the European Commission. I don't know, Ricardo.
Philip.
Sorry.
Yes, shortly I would like to add something about modifying the law. In many cases, what we need to do is just to add a few words in text which prevent, for example, subventions, financial support to cross the border. There are projects of kindergarten between Germany and France, and what prevents us to create this kindergarten, this joint kindergarten, is that on both sides of the border you can't fund such a public service if it is not on national territory or even on the land territory. For example, Saarland can finance only kindergarten which are in Saarland. So it's a bit like genetic. You have to modify just a short sequence of DNA in the law to enable the law to include within its remit the other side of the border. And I would say maybe in a third or half of the cases, you just have to add a few words in the law. And it's the same for certification, because the French authorities can certify a kindergarten which employs teachers which are trained the French way. So of course it can't be German teachers, but we could modify the law so that so as to accept German teachers as well. So it's in a certain way we have to broaden the remit of the law to make it more than national.
I would add just one element, which is multiplier effect. Solving border obstacles is not costly as it is doing investment. When we think about public policies, we frequently think about investment, we frequently think about infrastructure, and that's costly. When we talk about building up cooperation, frequently we are talking about bringing people together to have a football match and to understand that the other person is a better one. No, yesterday's was amazing. And getting people together and getting people to talk in cooperation. Interreg has been doing this for 30 years. And every time we see analysis of economic impact of public policies, in Interreg, I see the biggest multiplier effects than in any other development regional policy. And then I have a challenge. I have not yet seen no one doing an evaluation of the impact of solving border obstacles. Can one of you identify one PhD student and give him the task Your thesis will be about identifying the multiplier effects of B solutions. My supported me in give these people the data to start with. I'm pretty sure that the multiplier effect would be enormous. We have there 140, 150 cases. Each of them has cost less than 10,000 euros. When we compare with other investment costs in other policies, this is peanuts in terms of costs.
Want to say something?
No.
No.
Thank you.
Any more comments from you guys? If not, yeah, there we have a question. Please.
Thank you. Still, we have a couple of minutes, so I thought that following your logic, because you quoted that you pretend to be an outsider, then I'm a double outsider in terms that I'm a Hungarian and not a researcher, not a scientist, but a practitioner representing a civil society organization. And the reason why I came here to attend this session is that by coincidence, it was yesterday when a public consultation launched by the Commission ended, and the topic was to comment on a plan, actually on a directive, how to set up European cross-border associations, which means that how to bring into the whole process the voice of citizens and their organizations. And to my very pleasant surprise, I'm really pleased to attend this session and to listen to those very practical issues what you raised. Just to mention one issue, Mr. Ambassador, you asked whether in Hungary, a landlocked country, surrounded by several other countries, and if I look at the price arrangement, it's a catastrophe, it's a mystery, or something what you cannot find a logical explanation when you are looking at the price range of. And there are 100 other examples, and the reason why, in my opinion, is very important because the eternal question for the citizens is, how can I associate myself with the whole European integration processes? A very difficult issue. On one hand, relatively easy to produce a nice statement, far more difficult to translate the whole European idea into very practical things, developments. And I think that the prevailing feeling of this session assists us really to bring somehow closer the whole issue to the everyday life of citizens. I'm surprised, frankly speaking, if imagine that an innocent citizen is sitting here and listening after several decades of European integration, that the whole system was unable to find solution to seemingly very simple issues. Amazing. So there is, I think, a long way to go, and I'm very pleased to have this kind of, let's say, research orientation, what I take as a kind of encouragement to take further steps. And let me conclude by saying that I can't resist not to mention the upcoming European parliamentary elections. An important issue, because I think it is our common interest to have or to create a positive atmosphere as a result of the parliamentary elections, which would enhance, assist, promote the process leading to a situation where all those and other issues raised can be settled. In spite of the rather alarming, I would say, side remark, may I say, what we have heard about the financial financial situation, let's say, or the financial perspective in Europe. What I would like, and I'm quite convinced that I can speak on behalf of those who are here, that the message what Mr. Tokarski can take back from the session here to Brussels, regardless what impact it will make, that it is a good value for money. What, let's say, promotion of these processes can represent and can bring to the benefit of the whole European construction for the European project. Thank you.
Very much, sir. These were very good final words, but there might be so that some of you would like to add something here. And if no one else, then I would like to thank you all, thank the panel, of course, for their insights and knowledge and convincing me that my first reaction was erroneous. There are still things to do, although we are making progress in this. So things will be better. Always look at the bright sides of life. Thank you very much, all of you.
Still running. You broke the bounds, lose the shame.